You know, I never knew much about your early career except what I read about it. We never talked about that. You know, you grew up in Philadelphia, right?
Right.
In South Philly?
Yeah.
And were you interested in music as a kid?
Oh, I was a fan. I went and built myself a little stereo system. It was a Bogan amplifier.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, I'm trying to remember, it was a electro voice speaker, and I built the cabinet, and so I was always dabbling, and but I had never dreamed I'd wind up in the studio business. If it wasn't for the fact that Clark had created a music community in Philadelphia that didn't exist, I would never have been in the business. So it was just a chance.
Well, I got a lot of questions.
Unrehearsed questions.
Right. This is very informal. And
you know how to edit, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Don't even have to use a razor blade anymore. It's much easier. Well, you grew up in South Philly, and you must have been interested in electronics, right?
I was not a good student. My father wanted me to go to school. I didn't want to go. So with my buddies in junior high school, say, let's become electricians. I wasn't driven by anything. I was 16 years old. So I'll become an electrician, and I'll go to a vocational school. And my mother says, oh, that's just dirty work. Why don't you take radio? Now, electronics at that time was so far back, was radio repair.
Yeah.
TV had just gotten into the school. 1950. I graduated in 1952, so TV was just a new thing at the time. So I took radio instead of electrician, and I was always looking to make a buck on the side. So I started putting up TV antennas with the telerotors that they had and the whole schmear. And in high school, I co-opted for a TV company. So I watched at that time they called them tube jockeys. It was like the roofing business. It tended to be crooked.
Oh, really?
Well, the guy I worked for used to buy tubes that had no labels. That God knows where they were made or whatever. And you go into a house and take the customer over, and you bang on the power tube, and it always sparked when you did that. So this tube was going bad. I wasn't involved in it. I was the assistant to the technician. But so I learned enough that I could go out and I went to Temple a little bit at night school, and learned enough that I could supplement my income by fixing TVs at night. A guy I knew who had a little business, and the second floor was a dance hall. It was called the Frat, and it was a place where Avalon and Fabian and the Chancellor record people used to rehearse.
Where was that? Do you remember?
17th and Jackson.
Okay.
The hall is still there. So they had on the first floor was a jewelry shop where they sold small appliances and some jewelry and odd items that they were able to procure. So in fact, I bought my wife's engagement ring there, $450. Anyway, the guy says, "Do you know how to fix tape recorder?" So I said, "Sure." So and he said, "There's a little studio upstairs." So I went upstairs, and after 10 years of working at Philco, I knew enough from my experience in the research department that these guys didn't know what they were doing. So I asked them if I could rebuild the studio. They had a Berlant tape recorder and a couple of microphones and a portable mixer. I said, "Let me rebuild the studio." I talked them into buying two Ampex 351s.
Yeah, well, maybe back then it was 350s, but same basic model, yeah.
Yeah. And I built a little concept with the help of a guy named Norman Burke, who at that time was servicing Cameo Parkway at a studio at 1405 Locust Street, right across the street from the Academy of Music.
Yeah.
And so I got to know him, and he sort of introduced me to the players in the business, and he was always looking for help. So I started to fix the stupid problems that musicians, I mean, people had studios not because they were concerned about the art of recording, it's because they needed it to get their guitar on tape. Mm-hmm. So they weren't really interested in the technology. So I came in with only technology in my mind. I'm not a musician. So I was like a savior to them, fixing stupid problems that you would laugh at. Mm-hmm. And so I got introduced to the community, eventually met Harry Chippets. And now, let me tell you about this little studio. The purpose of the studio was that one of the owners of this little shop downstairs was related to Tony Mammarella. If the main name means nothing to you, he was the producer of the Dick Clark Show. Huh. He was an employee of ABC or WFIL. And so they figured we make a record, take it to Tony. Tony takes it to Dick. We're millionaires. Mm-hmm. Of course, that never happened, but
right.
But it was, that was the plan. Mm-hmm. So I got introduced to that community. And I met a gentleman, Harry Chippets, who was the vice president of Cameo Parkway at the time. And Dave Apple, I don't know if you know the name, but mm-hmm. Dave was the engineer, songwriter, producer working for Bernie Lowe at Cameo Parkway. And so I went to work as his assistant. And he taught me a lot because he taught me from the musician side how to deal with musicians mm-hmm. and the basics of recording. Now, I'd gotten a pretty good background at Philco. I was in the research department, but we worked on some projects that were really consumer. Stereo was new, mm-hmm. so I had to build a stereo system for the president of the company, and I put it into a T-cart, And we did work on. Philco was working on a stereo system for the home that had a common bass system. Mm-hmm. So we did tests on where the human ear lost direction, mm-hmm. and then we did projects with surround sound. We had a bunch of speakers, tiny speakers around the room, and they ran a tape at high speed to with a delay, mm-hmm. and so all these things gave me some. And at that time, Capitol had just opened the studio in L.A. in the record-shaped building,
yeah.
And there were a lot of articles in the Audio Engineering Society journal mm-hmm. about how they built that studio. So I had some idea, and the love for music came together, and I think what departed me from what was going on in New York and in Philly was the sophistication was really poor. Most studios had one tube preamp and equalizer, all tech PA equipment.
Oh yeah,
and that's what they would build their consoles out of, mm-hmm. with a rotary knob. Mm-hmm. 10K and 100K was the EQ. And so with the engineering journal, I saw that the sophistication was coming out of the West Coast because of the music of the film industry. Mm-hmm. They had the ability to be able to support,
they had lots of money.
Yeah. Outside of Bill Putnam and Universal in Chicago, who started Uri. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was the only guy independent that was doing something, we had an Echo Send. That stuff wasn't available. And the only technical magazine at the time was Broadcast Engineering.
Right. Yep.
I was fortunate to get in at the time when the industry exploded and the independents became the independents existed because creative people didn't like going to CBS and working with a union engineer that was looking at the clock, had no interest in the music. And so independents, Bell Sound and A&R and Bob Lifson's studio, I can't think of the name of it, that these studios sprung up and they took the independent producers' business and they gravitated to that because they had somebody that was willing to sit with them that was probably a musician as well as an engineer. But most studios were started by not technical people, but by musicians who wanted that freedom. So I brought something a little different to the table, in Philadelphia at least, in that I wasn't a musician. I came to it from strictly the technical part. And I think that the fact that I realized that the technology came from the West Coast and introduced me to Electrodyne and in Chicago to Uri and those guys were doing the groundbreaking recording technology stuff. I mean, I think at that time CBS was still using rotary Dave and faders.
Yeah.
You look at the old boards; they made great sounding music. I always envied the records. I envied when I got into the business and couldn't get the sound was what came out of the 30th Street Church in New York City.
Absolutely.
Well, when I
great sounding room.
Well, and all my life I tried to emulate that with an 11-foot ceiling, and that's I tried to develop the echo chamber, and when I got introduced to the EMT, I hated it. I didn't like it. I was used to a live room, but I eventually I would go to New York and watch. When somebody was doing a session in New York, I would try to follow them and watch what they did. And the biggest lesson I ever heard, I was trying to get a drum sound. Whatever I did, the drum sound sucked, and I didn't know why. So I went to New York with John Madera and Dave White, and they were recording a Bell Sound. Sitting in the control room, and the room is set up. It was a live session, so there was strings. They had 3 horns in the middle of the room, saxophones around with single mic. Drums were always at the far end. Bell Sound was a room that was like 20 foot wide and almost 40 foot long, a real long room. 18-foot ceiling. Yeah. And so the engineer's going around and he's testing all the microphones. 3 vocalists in a booth. So they're running down the song and he's muting the different microphones. And he soloed the drum mic. That sounds just like my drums. But then he opened the string mic.
Yeah, it was all the bleed.
And that was the biggest lesson I ever learned about, Yeah.
Well, that was a really interesting sounding room. I did some sessions there, and that really high ceiling, I think, really affected the sound of that room.
And there's some great acoustic sounding records came out of that room.
Yeah.
And at one point, they had like 80% of the chart was Bell Sound.
I know. And so even when I was there in the 70s, they still had the 3-channel monitors. No pan pots. It was either left, center, or right.
Yeah, well, pan pot was relatively...
Yeah. But even in the 70s, when that was on all consoles, they were still doing it that way.
So when we built our console, we tended to be a little ahead of the time for...
This was at Sigma or at Cameo
Sigma.
Park? Okay.
Dave Hughes. Everybody knows Dave Hughes.
Yep.
Dave built my equipment. And we were both at one point working for Jerry Blavitt. I built a console for him that he had in his garage on right off Overbrook Avenue, right off the city line.
Yeah. I want to know more about Cameo Parkway because I was never in that studio in its heyday. So what was that room like?
It was, I'm going to guess now, it's a long time. It was probably maybe 15 foot wide. I don't think it was longer than 15 foot.
I had no idea it was so small.
Yeah, it was small.
Yeah.
And they had a closet next door, which they had outfitted as an echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
Upright piano, one microphone stuck down inside.
Mm-hmm.
I think we used 2 mics on the drums. And it's interesting. That room was so funky. And we get a call from France. They want to know how we got our drum sound. We got what we got. I mean, that was. Right. I mean, Dave was a good musician, had good ears, but he was a musician. He had no clue about microphones and patterns. Mm-hmm. You know, the studio had one Pultec microphone, an A7 sitting in the corner looking at you. No, and it might have been it was a. It was a All-Tech 604 and a utility cabinet.
Yeah, right.
So that was it. We had one All-Tech limiter,
mm-hmm.
tube limiter.
Well, everything was tubes then.
One Pultec.
Yeah.
And that was it. I mean, you got what you got.
Right. Do you remember when you mic'd the drums? Did you have it was like an overhead and a bass drum mic?
I think it was 2 mics.
Yeah.
I think it was the overhead was a salt shaker.
Oh yeah, 633.
I don't remember it was on the bass drum.
Yeah.
But there was so much spill in the room. It was like the guitars were easy. You know, there was what was the EV 630? What was that? The very popular.
The 666.
Yeah, 666.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there was one problem. The echo chamber, when people would walk above us, was an office, and when people walk girls would walk with high heels on the floor, used to get in the echo chamber. So Bernie paid to have the office carpeted.
That's one way to solve it.
But the tenants in the building were very unhappy with us. We had to try to record at night because during the day, there was very little consideration to acoustics or, making a room soundproof or a double studded wall was not. There were musicians, and that's what gave me. I was just an edge above them, not far, but and I crammed a lot. I was very fortunate.
Yeah. Well, in Cameo Parkway, do you remember what were the walls? What were they made of?
What was the
walls at Cameo Parkway?
Oh, they had the typical acoustic tile on the wall. Okay. It was very primitive. You can tell by the sound of the records. It was just a plaster room with acoustic tile, and I don't think there was carpet on the floor. I don't think it was carpet. We might have used a throw rug. Mm-hmm. The upright piano had one microphone stuck down into it. Yeah. I mean, just what a musician would do.
Yeah.
The result of that was like a characteristic sound.
Right.
My theory is that in those days, records had personalities by the rooms they were recorded in.
Sure.
And I mean, you could tell like a Muscle Shoals record.
Right.
Instant you heard it.
That's right.
And
you can tell
same
Sigma.
with Motown.
Yeah.
So we had personalities.
Yeah. Well, if I'm like in a supermarket or a drugstore or something, they have music on in there. When something out of Sigma comes on, it's like instantly recognizable. Not only because they were hit records, but just the sound of that room. It's just so recognizable.
I think about it today, and I was chasing that Columbia sound, and so I always used too much echo. Mm-hmm. And I would take the music and often, not all the time, but feed it back into the studio.
Yeah. With
a couple of mics and try to blend it in. I always wanted it big.
Right.
And to my detriment, I think I overdid it. I mean, when I look back, some of them are sort of washy.
It didn't hurt their success any.
Well, you know what? What came first, the chicken or the egg? There's that professional pride. Kenny Gamble appreciated it, but I don't think was ever willing to say it was important. Mm-hmm. But there's one thing I can say, and neither Kenny Gamble or Tommy Bell or Leon Huff never had a hit record that didn't come out of Sigma. So, undeniably they were great talents and they would have found success anyway. But who?
Well, it was all part of the sound. You were part of it.
Well, and guess what? When I was doing it, it was like torture because I never liked anything. It's only today I can appreciate. I listen to it. Sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
But
I know exactly what you mean. The things you work on, you just say that is not what I wanted to sound like.
Did you ever get a record from the pressing plant that they didn't punch the whole dead center?
Right.
And you hear that little bit of wow.
Yeah. Yep. Well, every once in a while, I don't have the experience you have where wherever you go, you're going to hear your records on the radio. But every once in a while, I hear something I did. And often I don't recognize it because, who knows, you do a million things and most of them never go anywhere, at least in my studio. And, I'll be listening, I'll say, wow, I really like the way that's recorded. And then I'll listen a little more and say, wait a minute, I did that.
Yeah. Well, but, yeah, when you, I was very fortunate. My Bernie Lowe, who I admired, it was a little bit kooky, but said, the song is the horse on which the artist rides to fame.
Yeah.
I used to get records from the West Coast that blow me away. Mm-hmm. That uncolored, that music was uncolored. What we did in Philly and New York had that personality that we're talking about.
Right.
And the records that came out of United Western and Capitol was that unadulterated pure sound.
Right.
So,
well, people wanted what you had to offer, which was a distinctive sound.
You know what? It was interesting. They talk about the sound of Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. Tommy Bell's sound was as different from Gamble and Huff as night and day.
Right.
I mean, their music, sound is the wrong word.
Yeah.
Their music, Tommy was...
Arrangement, yeah.
Tommy, I think, looked after Burt Bacharach. I think he was more Burt Bacharach.
Yeah.
Gamble was more Memphis or more soulful.
Right.
Tommy was such a great arranger. He was so good.
Yeah.
I listened to Betcha by Golly Wow or People Make the World Go Round. He was such a articulate.
He just knew exactly what to do for the song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they were, and I say, when we talk about the sound and what was important, their music was different as night and day. I mean, Kenny's was banging down home music, and Tommy's at times was almost classical.
Yeah, right. So you were at Cameo Parkway for a number of years, right?
Yeah, I started in '62. I left in '68.
Okay, and at that point,
'67.
Okay, and was that when you found the 212 North 12th building, the Reco Arts building?
I always knew that about that building because when Bernie Lowe wanted to do something that was a little bit more sophisticated, he would go to, like, if he was doing a classy record with D.D. Sharp or the Times, or something that wasn't going to be that raggedy. He knew what the studio was that he had. So when he wanted something a little classy, he went to Amel. The trick was that they would go in with everybody, and when they thought they had a take, they used to shut off the vocalist microphone, do one more, so that they could come back and overdub it.
Yeah,
we'd take it to Cameo, and we went I tried never to go 4 times, but we go back and forth. Bernie would say, "I want to put a tambourine on it." Then I'm making a pass. You know, I was okay, but I wouldn't know. I don't think I bet you're a real. I mean, if the needle wasn't hitting at 0 when you aligned the machine, I was unhappy.
Right.
But you know, the machines. You know, it was interesting. They ran at different speeds depending upon. They didn't have dynamic tension or whatever.
Yeah.
So you try to display something from the end of the reel. In the beginning of it, you found out there were 2 different speeds.
Yeah. Yep.
So.
Well, this was all mono back then, right?
Well, it was just the birth of. We had a 2-track machine, but we didn't use it for 2-track. We used it as a 2-track, not as a stereo. We used it because we could put the vocal on 1 track, and as it was, I guess it was about early 60s, 64 when stereo became a product.
Yeah.
But what changed it all was when Dick Clark picked up stakes and moved to L.A. And then in '64 the Beatles hit. It was all over.
Yeah.
You could shoot a cannon through the hallway and not hit anybody. I mean, Camus being like dominant on the charts, all of a sudden it was a very hard time for Bernie Lowe and.
Yeah, that must have been quite a shock.
And here I am, no education. I mean, other than being a recording engineer, but no. You know, I went to vocational school. You know, now I've living a certain lifestyle. I got a family. I got a house in the suburbs of New Jersey. I'm not going to support all this. So I'm saying I might have to pick up states and try to get a job in New York. Or I tried. That was 65. It took me to 67 to put a loan in place to finally get somebody to. You know, Harry was going to be my partner. He's going to be my partner. I was going to basically work for him if he found the money. Fortunately, I found it on my own, and I was struck by lightning. I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, right place at the right time, and you had the right skills to make it work.
Well, I like to think so, but
yeah, well, sure. So Sigma opened in '68, correct? When you took it over.
It was actually close to the end of the year. It was August 5th, to be exact. The studio was, I made a lot of money, but it was always poor because I was spending it.
Yeah.
And we had one of the first, I bought 24 single rack Dolbys.
Right. All those green lights. Yeah.
Dolby came, it was such a big sale for them. They come in and installed it for me.
Yeah.
Whatever new box came out, I had the first delay line. Half a second of delay was, you know, phaser.
Sure. Yeah.
As soon as I got it, we did You Were Everything, the stylistics.
Right.
J. Mark turned the knob.
Well, when you opened, how many tracks did you have?
8.
You said opened as an 8-track studio.
Well, I bought a RCA Ampex
Ampex
8-track at Cameo, and then that was like 67. And by the time 67, I finally was able to sign a lease at 212. So I went to Scully, and I had them build a 12-track cabinet because Bell Sound had a 12-track machine. And I said, I don't know where this is going to go.
Yeah, I remember that machine was there when I was there. So
we had, 8 electronics for the 8-track and then a 4-track in one cabinet. It was pretty cool. In other words, and the idea was we had the 12 electronics, 12-track head stack, and we.
And that was on 2-inch tape, right?
I don't remember, but I think the Bell Sound machine was. I don't remember if it was on 1 or 2-inch tape.
Yeah. Well, the 8-tracks I think were all 1-inch. But the 12 was, in between, so
Yeah.
they could have used either, I guess.
Yeah, but so it never happened. Next thing that Scully came out with a 16 track.
Right.
With one machine, when the machine would go down, I was out of business.
Yeah.
So I would get up and drive to
Connecticut. Yeah.
and be on their doorstep when they opened with the tape machine, because the 16 track, whatever it was, I think it was a heat problem, but it used to go into a flutter mode. I had a room. Do you remember a guy named Bill Buster?
Don't recall.
Bill Buster was a guy that he did the overture for Tommy with. Do you remember Tom Sellers at all?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Tommy used to produce for Bill Sellers, Bill Buster, and he used to bring big aggregations in. So we're doing the overture from Tommy, copying the Who, and in the middle of the session, we'll play the tape back. It's going. I got all these musicians. I got away with the horns, but we had to put the strings on again because you could hear the flutter.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be when the machine got to a certain temperature, it went into this flutter. The drive motor went into this flutter mode. So I had to drive to and beg him to fix it. I had one machine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my studio, Veritables, opened in '68. I mean, excuse me, '69. The first was in Lansdowne, and we were always like one step behind you. So you were 8-track, we were 4-track. Then you went 16-track, then we went 8-track. And we kept going that way till finally we were both 24-track, but you had 2 or 3 24-track machines. We only had one.
It's all because of my customers.
Yeah, I know.
They
they demanded it,
right,
sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I know exactly what you mean. It was always, you had to have this newest thing. They come in, they want it.
Well, no, Kenny really didn't know. It was my way of being able to raise the price.
Yeah, okay.
I said, Kenny, you want it?
Uh-huh.
And he always bought in.
Mm-hmm. So when you moved into 212, that studio was basically stayed the same until you redid it.
It was basically what Emil Corson had. In between, there was a studio called Recording Arts.
Yeah.
A guy took it, and after that, it was Sound Plus. The what was their name? The two Italian brothers.
Yeah,
Luigi brothers.
Oh yeah.
Luisi, not Luigi. And they didn't like working with people. They were musicians, stuck with a studio. And when they got out, they had done very little to it was the same acoustic walls, and I modified the control room in order to put the big machine in and so forth. But
well, as I recall, that room was Transite, wasn't it, on the walls? Transite, which was that sort of concrete asbestos perforated tile.
Well, it had the perforated tile that was regimented holes. I have a picture of it.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of pictures where you can see that. Because, I started out working in radio. I worked at WPEN, which was on 22nd and Walnut. And those were old studios from the 40s. They hadn't changed them. And it had the same
Everybody used the same tile.
Yeah. Yeah. And it actually sounded very, very good, as long as the room was big enough. A small studio with that stuff didn't sound good, but if you got it big enough, it sounded pretty good.
Whatever you say, I mean, Amo was a mental case, but boy, he got some great sounding records.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I listened to for a mono studio.
Mm-hmm.
He really knew how to work that room.
Yeah,
I always admired him.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I went to when I went to 212 North 12th Street to open my studio was because of the sound of his recordings. Mm-hmm. What he did mono, he was a great engineer. However, he had an echo chamber that ran the length of the studio. It was like 40 foot long. It was 5 foot wide, maybe 4.
Yeah.
And then at the top, it had like a 9 foot ceiling. The building ceiling was almost 12 foot. He went up like 9 foot and then went across the hall, so it was an L shaped, and it ran the length of the hallway, the length of the studio. And I remember how it was made: keen cement. You had an A7 at one end, and RCA 77 at the other end. And I could point out records that you can listen to where you hear this fullness. Amazing. And I wanted to capture it. I could never do it. 40 years later, it dawned on me what was going on. You had a mono studio. So, when do you add echo?
When you're recording.
And what happens when you have a wall that's 1 2x4?
It bleeds right through.
So this warm bottom that is, if you listen to "Do the Cha Cha Cha" by Bobby Rydell, or "So Much in Love" by the Times, you hear this ambience, and I tried to capture that, and I never could. And I was recently, it bothered me all these years. Recently, I'm listening, and I'm thinking to myself, this guy could only put echo on when the guys were in the studio.
Right.
And so therefore, there was an acoustic transmission through that wall into that, which I tried to use that chamber. I eventually had to get rid of it because I had so much traffic. You walk down the hall, you hear them walking.
Yeah.
The soda machine goes on. It was a nightmare. So I had to finally get rid of it. It broke my heart, but I was never able to capture that big sound.
Right. I remember when that was there, and you couldn't walk down that hallway when you were mixing.
No, mixing. I mean, it was mono.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. But I mean, when you had the studio.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well, yeah. Until we finally redid the studio, but
right.
You learn to live with it.
Well, how big was that room?
It was like 22. The building was 34 foot wide. The studio was like 22 foot and almost 40 foot long.
Yeah.
But and the ceiling, it was like a 12 foot ceiling roof. But the ceiling was taped. I tapered the ceiling. I followed, the roof was tapered for rain flow. So I followed that contour to get as much height as I could.
Right, right. But
when I'd go to New York and I'd see Bon Jovi's place at the power station, that big. I wish I had the experience of working in a room like that.
Yeah. Because
we had to fight for all the acoustics. I did a record with a 309. I hated that room, but Kenny liked it because he could sit in his office and listen to the wall.
Yeah.
I built 2 rooms. Cameo built 2 rooms in that building, and they tore down the big room that we did Soul Survivors and when he bought the building and kept the little studio. And it was transparent. You could hear buses going by. It was really primitive.
Yeah. Okay, so you moved, you got Sigma set up and going. Who were your first clients in there?
I was working a lot at that time with Madeira and White. Well, their fame came from the Danny and the Juniors. They had a lot of modest hits as a writing team. You Don't Owe Me was like one of their biggest records.
Oh, yeah.
With Leslie Gore.
Right. Was that done there?
I think they did that. That was before me.
Yeah.
But they were like a good customer. I was working with and Huff, Leon Huff, worked for them at the time. So I knew Gamble and Huff before they knew each other. And Tommy had taken a job at Cameo after the company was sold, and they had the studio to know what to do with, and they had the ability to make records. They were still trying to make records. So Tommy was over there experimenting with the Delphonics and so forth. And I got to know Tommy pretty well. And Huff used to come in with Madeira and White. Then Huff met Kenny Gamble at the Schubert building, and then they came in together, and the rest is sort of history. They sort of clicked.
Let's see. I was always fascinated with that 212 North 12th building. When was that building actually built?
Well, when I got there, the first floor was RCA Service Company.
Oh.
The second floor was the studio. And as soon as I could, I took over the basement because I had these EMTs I had to put somewhere.
Yeah, they were always a pain to find a place. Yeah.
And about 73, 74, I took over the first floor and built a studio down there.
Yeah, Studio B. Yeah.
And that was a challenge because 1 foot, right above me was another studio.
Yeah.
But we managed. We put a suspended ceiling in. We built a room within a room.
Right. Well, I did some sessions in Studio B, even when there was stuff going on upstairs, and you could hear it, in the room, but you didn't really hear it in the recording. It was pretty well isolated.
Got away with a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they had that. We did a live radio concert with Robert Trower, who was a guitar player. I never heard. I don't know how many Marshalls he had, but I never heard. I mean, it sort of burned the walls. He was so loud. It's the one that the guy could hear.
Yeah.
And that we had to stop the session upstairs.
Yep. Well, when did you get the Electrodyne board?
The first console I had.
Okay, so you had that in '68.
Somehow, I don't know how I made the connection, but I think the first console had maybe as little as 12 inputs.
Yeah.
And it was 8 channels.
Yeah, I remember, they were so far ahead of everybody else, and you look in the magazines and you see this console in there and you say, look at that, that's beautiful, that's what break. I want.
Yeah, it was a lucky break.
Yeah.
But the EQ was 100 cycles, 50 and 10K and...
Yeah, pretty limited. But it worked well. That console sounded good.
And then Paul Buff,
Allison,
had this Memory's Little Helper.
Yeah, right.
I think I had... I don't know anybody to distribute. There were other automation systems on the market, but I think that was the first one that sort of worked. The problem with it was it kept losing time because you were transferring the data, and it kept moving. So you had, if you were good, you would anticipate the move,
make the move before it needed to happen. Yeah. Well, how many?
And people didn't like it because you had 2 tracks. You
lost 2 tracks. Yeah. How many inputs did that console have? Do you remember? It was pretty big.
The second one had, I think, 16. But the mixdown was 24.
Yeah.
It was separate.
That's right. That was a separate monitor section, yeah.
And we did things like we had the 8-button select. And so I think we were inventive. But again, Dave Hughes and my background at Sigma. So we put a switch in that would go 1 to 8 and flip the switch and it went 1 to 16.
Yeah.
And then we did another little tricky thing was that we'd do stereo panning between odd and even.
So when you opened up Sigma, you were the engineer. You did 'em, you did all the
I was
sessions.
the only employee.
Yeah. And how long did that last? When did you bring in other people?
Well, I tell people, I was friends with the social friends with John Madeira.
Mhm.
The summer of the next year, he took me to Europe. So my wife and I were on vacation in Europe. I took a $45,000 loan to open the studio.
Yeah. That's a lot of money back then.
You better believe it.
Yeah.
I was very lucky to get it.
Hmm.
Anyway, I was doing enough business that this summer of '69 I went to Europe.
Wow.
So it was like getting struck by lightning. I mean, I was so fortunate.
Yeah.
I mean, Gamble Enough literally exploded. By '71, the studio was busy day and night. I was working. I mean, I immediately had to hire Carparullo, and I was fortunate. Remember this. I took the responsibility, but I took the second floor of 212 with Frankfurt Wayne.
Right.
So they sort of buffered me. He gave me the courage. I signed the lease. They were my tenants.
Right. Well, we should point out Frankfurt Wayne was a disc mastering lab.
Did all the mastering for they were pretty good technical guys.
Yeah.
And they helped me.
And they were right in back of the control room.
Right.
Yeah.
They had the front offices.
Yeah.
And they, Tom was pretty good technically.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a good marriage of what I lacked, and was a lot. I had to support it. Dave Hughes he did a marvelous job. Unfortunately, we never got along. So I threw a bench twice at him one time. I got so mad. He used to make me boil. But he did art. He meets your standard for wiring. You know, I mean, everything's laced and squared off, and the military style.
Right.
He was very.
So who was the first engineer you hired besides you?
Carparullo.
Yeah. And how long was he there? He was there a long time, right?
I'm going to guess. It was probably the early '80s, and he and secretary Vivian Abbott took their profit sharing and opened a restaurant. And the one thing I'm very proud of today is my employees had health insurance, life insurance, and profit sharing.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
Fortunately, the business was good enough. I mean, you know, it worked out.
Yeah.
So I'm very, when I hear, you know, the struggle of, I guess things were different then. I don't, you know, it might be more difficult today, but.
We should mention that sitting in front of Joe here as we're talking are 4 Sigma recreation direct boxes based on Joe's original design from Sigma.
That's an overstatement.
I know, everybody did the same thing. We all built those same things, but this was Sigma.
Remember when people used to, I remember hearing stories of people cutting the potted elements of a Pultic apart to see what was in there.
Yeah, right.
It wasn't by today's standards. It's not a very precise equalizer.
Yeah, it's true. But I think that was why you had such good dedicated employees, because you took good care of them, and they liked working there.
They believed. I mean, they would come in on Sunday and be painting, you know, the gobos or something. I mean, yeah. But I had a certain, not as much as you, but I had a certain thing about, you know, they knew that when they walked through the hall, if there was a coffee cup on the table, they threw it away. I mean, we picked up it. And you know what? Well, I found out, you know, a lot of the people that came to Sigma were from the inner city and so forth. They treated the place the way they found it.
Yeah.
The cleaner you kept it, they treated it with respect.
Well, I always remember that place was always immaculate. I mean, it was well worn, but it was clean and everything worked.
You know J. Mark?
Sure.
He was sort of my buddy, and I don't know who came up with it, but we took an ad. I remember Olmsted Studios in New York took an ad that said "more balls," and the other people were taking ads with listing all their equipment. So I said, "What can we say?"
Yeah.
So we took an ad. I think Jay came up with the idea: clean restrooms.
It's true.
And I got more mileage out of that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know those guys were Gamble and Huff were just as hungry as I was at the time. I mean, they had to make it, and fortunately, they didn't have success at Sigma right off the bat. It was they signed a deal with they were with GRT, which was a and they did a couple OJ's albums and didn't do anything. They signed with CBS, Clive Davis,
Right.
and they were almost at the point when they were going to be dropped, and McFadden and Whitehead and Huff wrote Backstabbers, and that took off and that was like from there on in, and I think that was 72, and I moved there in 68.
Well, I think there was a pretty long stretch in the 70s when Sigma had 10% or more of the chart.
Well, it was a lot of the disco charts.
Right.
I mean, I don't think that Gamble and Huff or anybody other than the people that came after, like Tom Moulton and Vince Montana, played that disco card. I think they just made dance music that people danced to,
Right.
and coined that name. But
so you opened up 8-track, and that was 8-track was a Scully or an Ampex?
Scully,
Yeah.
and that was a Scully 16.
Right. I had both those machines too.
And then I jumped to 3M.
Right. Yeah, my 24 was a 3M M79 too.
And I was fortunate. I found people that became experts. Mike Spitz.
Right.
And
yeah. Well,
but they went out to work for Ampex. They were telling Ampex what to do. They told 3M what to do. I was so lucky to, and they felt lucky to be working for me. So it worked out. But I had people that were really designers, and Jerry Block invented the synchronizer. What was it called? He was able to lock two tape machines.
Oh yeah, this empty time code.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So I had very creative, and I think I like to believe that it was the decorum and the attention to detail that I admire you for, that gave them a place. I mean, I attracted. If I did anything great, it was I attracted good people.
Yeah. Yeah, you sure did. Because, I did a bunch of sessions here because you were always the next stage ahead. So when we were 16-track and we needed more tracks, we'd book the time at Sigma to do the rest of the project. And it was always, to me, it was just always a joy to work
My
there.
advantage was I had the customers. I mean, if Gamble and Huff had left me, they were at least 30, 40% of my business.
Yeah.
In Philly.
Yeah.
In New York, we rode the wave of. I laugh. One of the biggest sessions that we ever did was the fact that David Bowie came to Sigma, and when I point out to people, I said it was a big deal in Philly. Bowie had been a couple of times Sigma in New York. Nobody even noticed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there was something special about that Sigma Philly sound that I think people all liked. But tell me about when the rhythm section that the Sigmas and Gamble and Huff are so associated with. How did that come together? Do you remember when those guys got together?
Well, there was an evolution. When we were working at Cameo Parkway, when Gamble and Huff, before and Tom Bell were working at Cameo Parkway, it was a different rhythm section. And I'm not sure, Baker and Harrison Young was a big change. And that happened probably, they probably entered the picture about 66, 67. But in 65 and the records before that, the early Intruder records were a different rhythm section. And it had a entirely different sound.
Sure.
Carl Chambers was a drummer, and his brother
For the
Roland
other,
Chambers. His name
oh,
I was
that's
trying
it.
to think
Yeah. For the other players like strings, who was the contractor for the strings?
Don Ronaldo was a
Character.
He was a bistro violinist that go around the tables.
Yeah.
Whatever politically, he got in there and he became the contractor.
Right.
And like the god that the horn players and string players looked to gain favor with, because I met in a couple of years back, 2013. We honored the MFSB and so forth. And those guys, these the bald-headed Jewish guys and Italians and with pot bellies, and they loved. You'd think that they would sort of scoff at doing this black music. They loved it.
Yeah.
I saw.
Joe, you can hear that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're engineers. We got to
Yeah,
put a switch in front of us. We got to play with it.
Joe DeAngelis,
Right.
French horn player.
Yeah, sure.
I met him a few years back. He's still alive.
Is he?
And he said, how he admired working for Tommy.
Yeah.
Joe DeAngelis traveled with Frank Sinatra. He traveled the world. He was in Africa and so forth with Frank Sinatra. So when they say that, the respect that they had for somebody like Tommy Bell.
Yep.
So they really appreciated working for.
Yeah. Well, we used to use Joe DeAngelis when we needed a horn player. And
it was the same. You call them first chair players. That
right.
Everybody uses the same people.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. And my studio was really successful only because of Sigma, because you had all the, you brought people in, and we got the overflow.
Well, what's interesting. In those days, in New York, they had rental companies. There was nothing like that in Philly. So I was buying Fender Rhodes pianos, whatever the toy was, I was buying. So I had the clavinets and
right.
So when people came to Sigma, I owned the guitar amps. Because you couldn't go to what was the rental company in New York called?
Oh, I know who you mean, because we used to use them all the time too.
Yeah.
Client would come in, they'd insist on something they had to have, and
right.
We'd rent it from.
It was funny how the business worked in those days.
Yeah.
SIR.
Yeah, right. Sigma was really successful, and you opened the New York room. What year was that?
We built it in '76. We opened in '77.
And how was that different from Sigma Philly?
In what way?
Well, sound-wise, client-wise. I mean, there's so many. It's a totally different market, right?
Yeah. Well, everybody came because of Philly.
Yeah.
I got a shot at everybody. We were never the premier studios. That was Hit Factory and Tony Bon Jovi's place.
Yeah.
We had a nice run. I guess I can remember about maybe 50 gold records come out of that studio.
And
I mean, it wasn't. It was limited by the real estate. The building had 10-foot ceilings, so you couldn't do a lot.
Yeah.
But we did a lot of jingle work when they'd come in and with a whole orchestra, and then in 1 hour they wanted to be out of there, And those guys, I couldn't work under that type of pressure, but I had the guys that could do it.
Yeah. How big was that room?
Well, we had 3 studios there.
Yeah.
That room, I'm going to say it was 30 by 20.
Mm-hmm.
It was odd shaped,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, the 10-foot ceiling, we had clouds, and
Yeah.
that broke it up a little bit. But I was always looking for the better mousetrap, and I was working with Paul Buff at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and with the automation, you know, you had that problem where the automation had a throw that your physical fader didn't, and he invented what he called the endless fader.
Mm.
You remember that?
I remember that term. I forget how that
It
worked.
was a piece of photographic film, 35 millimeter film, that had stripes on it. It was continuous. It was like on a roller.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, and that went over like a lead balloon. I mean, it was shortly after that SSL was making all the noise, and we bought the first 600 console, which was made for video production. And Dave McTeague was head of head of technical service department, and he actually worked with SSL in redesigning. We bought what they shipped, and he redesigned it, and they adopted it. So that's the kind of people we had, fortunately. It was way over my head, but good.
Yeah, I was going to ask about staff. How many of the people from Philly were involved in the New York studios?
I would say 6.
Mm-hmm.
Jay, Mike Hutchison, about 6.
Yeah. Were they permanently working up there? Did they move back and
Yeah,
forth?
Jay is still living in the ones that moved up stayed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, the single guys that came to me in a camper to begin with. Mike Hutchison lived in a Volkswagen bus across the street.
Oh my goodness. And then, what year was it when you did the total rebuild of the Philly studio?
Big mistake. That was early 80s.
Yeah. The records never sounded the same after that.
I was so impressed with the Tom Hidley studios in the West Coast, and I always suspect of yourself, and never, like you say, the way you remember records. I didn't know how good they were going to sound to me later, so I was always chasing, and I chased too far. I'm not sure what. I guess it was the room.
It just didn't have that same character.
But remember this: a lot of Kenny Gamble's records, he wanted to work over at 3909. I hated that room.
Yeah.
The control room was 10 foot front to back.
Yeah.
So the speakers are right over your head.
Yeah.
How that room worked, I'll never know. I hated to work in that room. But there were a lot of records came out of there.
That's true.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean,
what the magic was of Studio A, I don't know, but I know what you're saying.
Well, I mean, it was just one big open room, and I think that had a lot to do with it. The new room was a lot of angles, a lot of booths. Everything had its own isolation.
Yeah, the piano was in a booth.
Yeah.
The drums were in a cavity.
Right.
And those 3 pillars were always in the way.
I know. There's no way around that. Yep.
Well, the guy that bought it from me put steel on the roof and hung the roof from the took the columns out.
Just to get rid of those columns. Wow. That's an expensive thing to get rid of columns.
Well, he was a contractor.
Okay.
He should have stayed a
right.
contractor.
Yeah.
That poor guy took a bath.
Yeah.
But I told him he was a dreamer. When I could take a cannon and shoot it down the hall and not miss anybody, I said, I didn't leave the business. The business left me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was lucky to get. I came in on a knee at a curve, and
you knew when to move on. So after Sigma, what did you do after that?
I made a bad deal. Sinking ships. You tie your boat to the other boat so you're both unstable.
Yeah.
So I partnered with Alpha Studios in South Philadelphia.
Oh yeah.
But the record business was changing too. But the intent it wasn't a bad idea. They had a hit record. I can't think of the name of it right now. Mm-hmm. And the idea was they were going to follow that formula and make records. Pete was a businessman, or thought like a businessman, and he knew how to promote a record. So with that skill and Sigma, we were going to start a record company. Mm-hmm. And so we spent the next 2 years trying to raise $3 million for the record company. And it was like hell. And they finally got the money, got a deal with Polygram. Mm-hmm. After we didn't produce, we got dropped, and it was very shaky for a long while.
Yeah.
And I bought the studio back, and my son ran it. So eventually, we started a public company. And I sold my interest. It went another direction, and I didn't understand it. It wasn't my business. And Pete became very successful, to his credit.
So the 212 building now, I think they're turning into condos or something?
They had so many violations that it got shut down. They took the 214 building, demolished it. Mm-hmm. You could stand on the basement floor and look at the roof. The only thing that holds that front wall up is they left the 3 front offices, and the rest is gone.
Oh.
And they must have violated so many building codes that the city shut them down.
Yeah.
It could have been like Sun Studios or whatever. It could have been a destination, but it takes money.
Yeah. It's a shame. I mean, there is a historic marker there now.
Yeah.
What haven't we talked about that you'd like to talk about?
The main thing is what we started with was Emil Corson and the sound he got and how it eluded me all those years until I figured out the secret. It was sort of like an inevitable mistake or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that part of Sigma, first of all, nothing would have happened without Gamble, Huff and Bell.
Yeah.
They were they almost everybody in the rhythm section had their own little success. Mm-hmm. Vince Montana had the South Soul Orchestra. Mm-hmm. Baker Harrison Young had the Tramps. Mm-hmm. Bobby Eli had Blue Magic. Mm-hmm. So everybody had almost everybody connected had their bite of the apple. And that all stemmed from the notoriety and everybody follows a hit. Mm-hmm. I tell people that when Nirvana had a hit in Seattle, everybody, the record companies ran there and signed everybody who was carrying a guitar.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Prince.
Yeah. Minneapolis. Yeah.
Everybody follows a hit. So when Gamble and Huff and Bell started to have hits, people came from all over. I mean, 2 guys come from into the studio and go to my manager's office, Harry Chippets, and say they read off names, obviously off the back of an album, and Harry, in his wonderful way, switched them to other people that were available, and they created the Village People.
Was the rhythm section contracted to Gamble and Hupp, were they always
One
independent?
of the big mistakes that Kenny Gamble made was he could have locked up, and he never did. I'm looking for the word for evolution. There was evolution of musicians that changed, but the core, the main one was Baker Harrison Young, Ronnie Baker, Earl Young, and Norman Harris.
Yeah.
And around them were Eli, Bobby Eli, and Vince Montana was a key part of the group, and Larry Washington played bongos, and there was an evolution, but they were the core in the hottest period.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was quite an era.